leading the charge, what I guess the Conservative government was making sure was that if they weren't in power in 2016, then the Labour government, or whoever it was, wouldn't be able to reverse that decision simply because there was an EU directive that was driving us all in the same direction. Now, does that mean that we're going to have universal standards and a universal approach across Europe? Absolutely not. You know, I think some countries will basically look to the UK for a lead, and other countries will take an entirely different attitude and do their own thing in their own way. I think one of the biggest flaws that we've had in the UK approach to this is that the government declared its strategy in 2011 and declared its target in terms of what it expected by 2016, and then kind of threw its hands up in the air and said, we've got no money, industry, you can figure out how to do that. And to be honest, chaos has reigned ever since. The Germans are taking an entirely different view. They, of course, with their usual Teutonic efficiency, are basically taking a very top-down approach. And this is a very senior level within government. And therefore, they're going to drive down a kind of set of standards which will allow this to happen quite transparently across the industry. Whereas within the UK right now, there are lots of competing standards and activities going on, which, to be honest, ought to be sorted out. But there is nobody sitting on top of this driving it. The French have also declared that by 2018, they will have the same kind of BIM level 2 mandate that we've got in the UK. So there are various activities that are going on around Europe, which mean that the whole of the European Union is moving in the same direction. Some of the countries pretty much don't need to do very much. So most of the Scandinavian countries are pretty well advanced and, to be honest, are in a better position. Some of them are in a better position than we are today, simply because they recognise the need for BIM a long time ago and have been very proactive in terms of having government support to bring that in. So, what's Cobie? This magic thing called Cobie, which, first of all, how many people have heard of Cobie? Okay, what's this magic thing called Cobie? It's pretty much a spreadsheet. Within that BIM model up there, this thing here, you can see that from that BIM model we can produce all sorts of outputs. We can produce traditional 2D outputs, we can produce videos, we can produce movies, we can produce schedules, we can produce lists of the products that are in that, etc., etc. And of course, therefore, we can look at it both from a data point of view and also from a visual point of view. And all that Cobie is an extraction of data out of that model into a spreadsheet. The problem is, sorry, if you're copying this down, I'm very happy to share a PDF of the presentation with you. The problem is that Cobie is not quite that simple. If you actually look at what Cobie requires, each one of those little boxes there, facility, floor, space, zone, systems, component type, etc., those are individual spreadsheets within the Cobie set. Each one of those spreadsheets is actually linked to one of the other spreadsheets. So trying to do this manually is just mission impossible. I've worked on some of the early projects that were that produced Cobie output for the Ministry of Justice, and it wasn't unusual, and these weren't particularly big projects, it wasn't unusual to get to a point where, particularly for things like the attributes spreadsheet, that we'd end up with 1 million rows and therefore bust Excel. And those weren't particularly big. I mean, if you put a hospital through this, it would bust, 1 million of those would get bust pretty much on most of the different spreadsheets there. So it's actually a very complicated, in fact, there are 23 different spreadsheets that are all related. And those 23 different spreadsheets, as I said, have to basically have the right data in there. Now, that data can come out of a BIM model very easily. It can't come out of pretty much any other process. So the data that is required, and remember what the government's really after is that data. The data that's required has to come out of a BIM model in some shape or form. And fundamentally, I can describe the BIM data that's required in a Cobie sheet under 3 headings. There's the product data. There's data that describes the product and also describes what you need to do to that product if it's a maintainable asset. In other words, if it requires regular maintenance or if it's got a spares list, those sorts of things, that needs to be recorded within this. There is also installation data, because there are some things which you can't know when you're designing the product, when you're designing the building or designing, for instance, the construction process. you only know that at the point of installation. So examples would be serial numbers that go onto different products, pumps, those sorts of things. You only know that when it's actually being installed. That information has to be recorded, and that information has to find its way back into this BIM model so that it can basically produce this Cobie output. And then there's the client-specific stuff. Fortunately, there hasn't been very much of that so far, but the clients, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Defence, whoever it might be, they have the ability to define additional information at the outset of the project that they might want. Much of that information, if it's about the product, will actually be obviously required from the manufacturers, and we'll come back to that later. So that's pretty much what Cobie's all about. It's pretty simple, but just quite complicated to get to. So let me just talk a little bit about BIM for M2. We were set up very late in the day, so as you'll see in a minute, there are lots of BIM for different type groups. Most of them were set up immediately after the government's procurement strategy in 2011-2012. We weren't actually set up until the middle of 2013, when somebody woke up to the fact in the BIM task group that actually this BIM stuff might actually affect manufacturers. And as a consequence of that, BIM for M2 was set up with this particular mission: for the UK construction product manufacturing sector to be recognised as a world leader in the integration of BIM manufacturing technology to supply the products and solutions for a sustainable built environment. Okay, great words. What we're trying to do is basically help manufacturers transition from, in quotes, the old world to the new world. This is where we fit, the little red box. Now, the BIM task group doesn't actually exist anymore in this particular form. The individual groups do. The BIM task group was disbanded at the back end of last year because it's now moved on to basically look at BIM level 3, and they're trying to drive that and define what that is. But as you can see, there are lots of different BIM for groups, and we basically communicate with those when we're in a position where we need to. So as an example, the BIM for M2 group, we're talking to the UK contractors group for the very simple reason that we actually want to understand what it is that the contractors think they need now and are likely to need in the future, because that's going to feed back into what it is that you guys as manufacturers are going to need to provide. So that's where we sit, and as you can see, there are lots of different individual groups there, each one of them trying to represent a particular community who's concerned with what's happening with respect to BIM in the construction industry. Now, back one, sorry. In terms of BIM for M2, it's got 3 different work streams. I'm the chair of one of those work streams, and I'll explain which one in a minute. The first one is a work stream that's associated with education. So if you go onto the BIM for M2 website, you will basically see a number of tools that we've actually produced and are available. There's one tool there which is called Compass, and what the Compass allows you to do is it basically asks you, it's a spreadsheet, it basically asks you a series of questions, and as a consequence of your responses to those questions will basically indicate where on a scale of kind of 0 to 100 you are in terms of your susceptibility to need to do something about BIM. If you've got products that aren't consumed in the public sector, you're probably going to be pretty close to 0. If you've got products that are consumed in the public sector, that's obviously going to move you up. So if you're kind of interested and you want evidence of whether BIM's going to affect you, that's kind of quite a good method. We've then got something called BIM for M2 Curve, and basically it's how do you do it. It allows you, if you're a large company here, then the chances are you've probably already got predefined processes for how you put business cases together and that sort of stuff. If you're a smaller company and haven't, this basically gives you a framework, and this is the kind of the framework that, this is Compass. This is the framework that basically you can drill down into and get information about how you either plan for this, how you implement it, and how you review how you're doing as a manufacturer. So that's the education group, and if you go to the BIM web, as I said, if you go to the BIM for M2 website, there's a reasonable amount of information there that will be helpful to you. And stuff such as, if you're going to produce your business plan, here are the kind of the topic headings, and the topic headings are then filled out with more detail in terms of how you can address those particular questions. So hopefully you'll find it a useful aid, even if you're a large company with your own defined processes. I work I'm the chair of the data templates group, and I took over the chair of that in the back end of October last year. I had previously been working in the education group. And what we're trying to do is to bring together a number of disparate parties that have tried to define what are known as product data templates. So this is the data that you need to provide as manufacturers in order to be BIM compliant. We're trying to bring together people from CPA, Construction Products Association, MBS, CIBSE, and obviously us. We're trying to work with trade associations and professional institutes, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. We're trying to define the information that's required for products to try to get some consistency in terms of the way that different people are actually addressing the provision of this data. It's very much a focus on information, and we actually are completely agnostic when it comes to which BIM platform people use. So there are probably 4 or 5 different BIM platforms that are used by architects and designers, less so when it comes to people who are consulting engineers, because you need more specialized software then. So today we have something called a product data template, which has this sort of format. This particular one is designed for Cobie. So this will basically define the data that a trade association should encourage its members to complete as part of their provision of meeting BIM Level 2 requirements. Okay? So fairly simple headline information there. Then you start getting into some of the detail. And the detail consists of specification information. As you can see here, you've got various bits of information that describe the manufacturer, perhaps construction data, application data, dimensional data, performance data, those sorts of things, electrical data, etc. If the product obviously doesn't have electrical data, then it doesn't have that in. If it's a plumbing product, it'll have other data in, etc. So there are a number of different templates, and those templates are produced based upon product type. But they're produced by trade associations in association with their membership. Looking at more detail that goes into there, there's sustainability information, and there's also facilities asset management, in other words, how you operate the product. In this particular instance, we've got stuff that's basically described from the CIBSE perspective. So just to show you what that might look like, one of the other guys that works in the data templates group is the BIM manager from Legrand, who do electrical components, as you're probably aware. And he's basically completed, this is just the first part of the product data template that he's produced for the cable ladder systems that Legrand provide. And that provides the framework that all cable ladder products will end up using, but he's filled out his own individual component data in this area here. So once a template is produced, it is basically distributed to the members. The members then fill out the data that goes into that for their individual products, and those become individual product data sheets as opposed to templates. Okay? Hope I've made that clear. Oh, for some reason,